Hey, welcome to episode 155 of the Titanforge podcast. We've done this successfully 154 times, and I'm Dratus, joined by Troll.
Always flawless.
And also Tuttles.
And we've now done it successfully 155 times. Welcome to the show.
Yes, those watching the VOD or listening later will have no idea how scuffed the last 2 minutes have been, but we carry on. This week's episode, we have 3 different interviews with developers that we are going to analyze. We've got a Morgan Day interview with Wowhead, we've got an Ian interview with Raider.io, and then we've got another Morgan Day interview with Liquid Maximum. So that has a lot of stuff to dive into. Then we'll briefly talk a little bit about what to do once the expansion actually launches. We are not going to have an episode next week because next week is Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving on Thursday. So we will be or I guess some of us will be busy then, and some of us will be sitting here doing the pre-patch event. We'll see.
For reasons.
And then after that, we'll have an episode the week after the expansion launches. We'll probably have an episode the week after that, and then
yes,
and then TBD beyond that.
Right. So I suspect that December 1st and December 8th will be our next live shows, with of course, coming out on the feeds on the 2nd and 9th, respectively.
Yeah.
Probably not going to see an episode from us on the 15th and the 22nd. We'll see exactly how that turns out, though, but that'll be like Mythic Week 1, Mythic Week 2. Maybe we'll be back for Mythic Week 3. Maybe we won't. Or maybe we'll sneak something in sometime at an off time during those weeks. But
yeah,
that is our current plan for the next month at least. So
I have a suspicion we'll probably have something for the 29th, but I don't want to lock something in that far in advance anyways.
Yeah, hopefully and we may even be able to put something else on there as well. And even though Titanforge may be down, there should still be other good content coming from us on like GG WoW and our own YouTubes and Twitches and stuff. So
yeah,
it should be a pretty exciting time nonetheless.
Getting World First 20.
Oh.
I don't
know
about
the
World.
strats.
World First 20?
At least server first.
Well, you're just going to high roll. No. This guy's a filthy high roller. You're just going to high roll from Court of Stars into, what's another really fucking easy key? Court of Stars into Court of Stars, actually. Yeah.
What is the easiest one?
Jade Serpent, probably.
Court of Stars into Algathar Academy into Court of Stars into Algathar Academy.
I think you go 3 chests Shadow Moon into 2 chests Jade Serpent into 1 chest 20 Court from a 15.
Whew. That is
okay, but there's no way
that descent. Yeah.
There's no way that Jade Serpent's staying 35, but yeah, good luck.
Yeah, true. We'll see when it gets closer.
That dungeon's losing 10 minutes. Good luck.
For real, though. It actually should, probably.
Yeah.
That and Shadow Moon, too.
Shadow Moon, you probably lose like 3 or 4?
Yeah, something like that.
Not 10.
All right, well, we have some other news to cover as well at the top of our show here. News number 1 is that Chinese World of Warcraft apparently is shutting down, or at least it's in danger of shutting down. Blizzard and NetEase haven't reached an agreement to continue services after January 23rd. Skyline's put out a statement that says they're still going to raid this Race to World first, but obviously the next one after Vault of the Incarnates would be after January 23rd, so if no agreement can be met or found, then World of Warcraft is going to be shutting down alongside Hearthstone, Overwatch, D3, StarCraft 2, Heroes of the Storm, until some indefinite point in the future when they find another partner to work with in the region.
You're like a poli-sci major. This is like a negotiating tactic, right?
Well, I'm not sure. So I first of all, I'm a poli-sci major. That means I have no idea what that means for video game regulations in China.
You're like the closest one to us, any of us who knows what's going on.
Yeah, so NASDA, who's a big source of information on what's going on in the Chinese region to the west, posted a tweet kind of explaining some of the stuff going on behind the scenes here. And it seems like apparently the biggest potential new partner for Blizzard to work with would be ByteDance, who owns TikTok. But there are other companies that could potentially do it. It looks like the way it works basically is that any game needs to have a domestic, like a Chinese domestic partner, to get a licensing deal in the region. So if that doesn't come through, we could be looking at a disruption of service until there is a new deal. NetEase apparently is also the Microsoft partner, and obviously the Microsoft Blizzard merger is coming soon. So maybe that I don't know what that means either, but
That's crazy,
yeah.
man. Can you imagine just all of a sudden losing like 8 big games, and just like not able to play them at all? Like that's nuts.
I think that this is like something that they have to get resolved. I don't think this is a question of like, are they going to get this resolved? I think that they like almost have to fix this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they can find another provider, right?
Yeah.
It seems that way to me, at least.
I mean, I think it's likely that World of Warcraft in mainland China will still be playable this time next year, but a disruption, like the game not being available for a few months, I think is not out of the realm of possibility.
Dude, China loves classic too. That'd be so salty.
Yeah, especially because they got owned on Wrath of the Lich King the first time as well, because that there was like another Blizzard provider in China swap that made it so that they only got like a couple of months of Lich King the first time around.
Well, they won the Sunwell Plateau race to world first, and so they have to really make sure that they continue to ramp up their important esports events. They also won. They got second in an MDI and won a TGP, so I would be very sad if China was to have a disruption for any extended period of time.
Yeah, I think they
They
also
also
got
take up
okay.
the majority of the Alliance Hall of Fame spots.
Yeah, and they got world first Yogg Saron no lights, I think. So all kinds of impressive accomplishments. Although we'll have to see who gets world first Yogg Zero lights this now that it's for real in WoW Classic, of course.
Stars 2.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, obviously hope that gets resolved and everybody who is currently playing can continue to. It definitely would really suck to just... I mean, like, I'm sure you could play on other servers, but that'd be a pain. And
they're gonna VPN over or something? Like...
probably more expensive, maybe risky. We also have a welcome back weekend that's ongoing. I doubt many of our listener base would make use of this, but if you would, basically you can log in and play for free even if you don't have a sub until November 20th. So that's over until Sunday this weekend. And you still need to buy Dragonflight, though, if you want to make an Evoker, but you can do everything else, basically, for free for the next 4 days. So seems cool, especially if you're somebody whose subscription is lapsed, but you're going to play in Dragonflight. You can take advantage of the pre-patch event over these 4 days to level up your characters to 60, anything you want to play. But
you can level characters so fast right now.
Yeah, it's very fast.
Did you guys make your evokers?
Yep.
Not
What'd
yet.
you name them?
Dratnostraws. It's a red Dragonflight name, and I've got my character all in it's red Dragonflight colors as well, lore friendly, lore appropriate.
I'm Tettle sad.
Tittle's sad.
Very sad.
What's yours, Trell?
I didn't even log in yet.
What's
the
your
name?
baby?
Well, it's just gonna be Trell Voker, probably.
Okay, not bad. My guild has a variety. We've got names ranging all over the serious to meme gauntlet.
Could I interest you in Troll Dad or Troll Daddy?
Absolutely not.
Alternatively, Troll Lawn,
Troll. Oh, I'll consider that one.
Troll Mower.
Dude, it kind of does a lawnmower with deep breath. That's a
Yeah, Troll Mower.
sort of some lawnmower activity. Okay.
man.
We also have the first salvo in the Vault of the Incarnates Race to World First has been fired. We have Liquid Guild putting out their first offers for splits helpers. 20,000 or 200,000 gold per normal raid, 30,000 gold per heroic raid, up to 100,000 gold per keystone. And then also their crafters. They're looking for people to craft for them as well. It's going to be really interesting because I feel like the prices that normal and heroic raid are going to command will vary hugely based on like the actual difficulty of this content in the first few weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting. And I remember last time, of course, we saw this kind of arms race where the guilds would keep posting their offers and then they'd get one upped by another guild coming in and like paying more. So
Well, I think that with pieces gone, that should maybe slow it down
Well,
in Europe a little bit.
yeah, that's the thing is in Europe there was pieces, Echo and Method all doing it, whereas in NA it was Liquid and BDGG. So we'll have to see what BDGG does here. I think their coffers are probably less full than Liquid's, although it's also interesting because the guilds that aren't Liquid and Echo have a lot harder time getting people, even if they're offering the same amounts of money, because just they have less clout. There's less stream viewers, less people that just want to help those guilds than Liquid and Echo. I think Method has been doing a pretty good job of like building up a fan base as well and catching up on that front. But that's going to be I will say it is a distasteful dynamic to me personally. Like I don't like the extent to which gold getting paid to helpers is an important part of the Race to World First, but it is an important part. I
think it's ridiculous.
Think it's worth covering. It's cringe.
I think it is fucking ridiculous. It's so sad that we got to this point due to Azerite dust. And it's just like, oh, and now we're here, and it's like, oh, we're doing splits. With people that aren't in your guild, like really.
I mean, so I was actually chatting with a friend about this yesterday. Like, how do you think splits are going to be affected by all the changes coming in? Like, first of all, they have Mythic releasing at the exact same time as Heroic, so they're just automatically on a bigger time restraint. I guess they're still going to want the same or a similar item level goal of what they identify as what they need to kill the boss, I guess, right? But instead of just like going all out for the whole 7 days before Mythic Week, they have to just identify a stop goal.
So previously they would spend 5 days doing splits offline is how it used to go down. Now they're not going to have those 5 days, and realistically, it kind of comes down, at least in my opinion, to how difficult the raid is going to end up being. Vault of the Incarnates, just from testing, I think that we all three kind of thought it was a little bit on the easier end, just via raid testing. And so then that's a question of like how much gear are you realistically going to need. I know last tier the number that was being thrown around was around like 6 character copies to kind of ensure that you were going to get a 4 set of tier. Now, I don't know if people are going to be running 6 character copies for beginning of expansion raid 2. So like that's also something that has to be factored in, is like time leveling characters and getting everything set up. Obviously, you can do that since there's like an M0 week and whatnot, but I think that they're going to spend less time just as a whole doing heroic splits this tier than they even did last year, because I think the raid's going to be just like that much easier.
Yeah, last time there was a very different way of getting 4-piece, right? The way you got 4-piece last time was you dropped shoulders or chest personal loot for yourself, right? From either Rygalon or Lords of Dread, and then if you did that, you could have helpers guarantee that you'd get the 3 from earlier in the raid, right? So you would just run mirror characters, and they would run the splits of Rygalon and Lords of Dread, and most people, although not all raiders, got at least one of their characters of the same class to get that tier. This time around, instead, what you can do is you can have one of each armor type main and one of each tier token main, and then, so that's 4 characters and 26 helpers, and you run a raid, and of the 5 tier bosses, if 4 of them drop Dreadful tier, then your Dreadful main in that split gets the tier set, right? And same with Mystic and stuff. And the chances of that are actually fairly good. They're not guaranteed, but it's at the point where, the chances are pretty good. The problem is you don't have a Heroic Week this time. The time you're spending doing that is during Mythic Week now as well. So I agree it'll hugely be dependent on how hard the Mythic raid is, but we're going to be coming into this week at like 370 or 375, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, well, so you can have like 2 crafted pieces already as well.
Okay.
So you're somewhere around that item level range. The Mythic raid is dropping 415, so you're coming in like way under eye level compared to the content.
Normal drops like 392.
Right.
Like you were dropping. So like, this is the point where normal previously wouldn't even be upgrades, but now normal are these massive upgrades because of you're coming in with M0 gear.
So if splits aren't required, it's because the boss can die on like day 1. That's otherwise splits are going to be vitally important to because they will still be the best way to catapult your main characters up to like 400 eye level within a couple of days. So I suspect that we are still going to see heavy usage of splits and even parallelizing the splits so that you have, instead of 4 mains and 26 alts, it's 4 mains, 26 helpers that aren't in the guild, and then you're running 7 copies of that all at once. Which
26 helpers or rat characters that don't need the gear, like
but like you want those guildies to be on a main in a different split. You want all your guildies to be on either mains or potential mains, right? You're not even sure which one your main is yet. You're just running until you get in a raid that drops you 4 dreadful pieces, so you get your tier.
I have a question. So how would you guys feel if they actually spread this out more? So instead of consolidating Heroic and Mythic Week, instead and like Squishy and I were actually talking about this the other day. He's been on the show a couple times. It's like 4 weeks of heroic. How would you feel if we had just 4 straight weeks of heroic? That would kind of kill heroic splits, and then you would go into mythic with like full heroic gear. You would likely have your tier sets and that kind of thing. And it would also solve the issue for our guilds where we don't really feel compelled to do heroic splits. People are gonna have their tier, and then we don't have to go back into heroic the moment that mythic opens. We immediately go into mythic instead.
That sounds awful to
sounds
me.
great for like some people. I feel like for the most players it would be really bad though, because like everyone wants to just go do mythic. Like in the top 1,000 guilds, probably, you know, like at some point you're trying to get into mythic on like week 1 or week 2 that it's out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, how would you like to do 4 weeks of farm before you can start doing prog? Not really. I hate farm. I like prog. I feel like also like you would still get benefit from doing splits there, and crucially, there wouldn't be anything better than splits to be doing with your time. So the splits would still happen because the splits exist for guilds whenever their upside is worth the downside, and there would be no downside to splits in this world because you couldn't be going into mythic anyways.
I do think that I would have preferred them like spreading, at least instead of experimenting with this one where they're the exact same week. I would have preferred them to spread out and see what that looked like, as opposed to them being the exact same week. Because the exact same week, in my opinion, sucks even more than if they were spread out longer.
I actually really like it. I got the opposite opinion on that.
Really? Okay, that's fair. I mean, I think it's fair.
I just didn't like the whole heroic week downtime where, like, if you're a mythic raider, like this doesn't apply to everyone, but if you're a mythic raider, you got this week where you're just not doing the content that you're aiming to do. It's like a little like warm up for the real content, and you can't even get like maximum loot out of Mythic Plus that week either, because it's all locked at like Mythic Plus 7 level or whatever, and that was really annoying.
That's a great point. Let's segue into the Morgan Day interview with Wowhead because he addresses that point specifically, talking about that, and I think we can talk about it a little bit more.
Yes. Okay. Class design, Morgan Day. So what was the intent behind releasing Mythic with the other difficulties?
Shit.
Yeah, this is a very long conversation talking about internally. What if the raid released like this? What if the release looks like this? Tried a lot of different things. We landed on this because we feel like we have the tools and resources to make sure that we're hitting our tuning targets. A good thing to hear them say, although hopefully true. Yeah. And yeah, a staggered release, but 2 going into the back part of the raid were releasing bosses that players had very little, if any, visibility into. So that really increased our confidence we could execute something like this. So they're saying the fact that we had Rygalon, Lords of Dread, and Jailer simultaneously released on Mythic, Heroic, and everything like that second reset, and it was fine, was something that made them feel more confident about it. I remember seeing more discussion about this as well, because there was something in one of these about how it was like weird to have that week where I think that may have been in the Raider IO interview as well. So this
was it in the Raider IO interview?
There was one about how it was weird to be you're trying to do here it is. Thought process behind simultaneous release of all difficulties. It's always been a little bit awkward that we have a situation where the season starts, but if you run an M plus higher than a 7 or 8, you're not going to get better rewards for some reason. It feels like, well, why? Oh, because Mythic Raid isn't open? Well, I don't do Mythic Raid, but wait, who cares? It doesn't matter, your rewards are capped because it would impact this other competitive scene that doesn't involve you. That's weird, something we thought about and weighed the pros and cons in the past, but then also because of the calendar timing, this also means that they're not releasing on Christmas week, right? Anything, which also has upsides for them. They kind of said, oh, we couldn't push it over until January because that would be a very long wait, which I still think probably would have been fine. Definitely would have been better for most people like in my guild, but still probably I guess I understand it maybe for average guilds. Although the thing is, I still think that like if you're in a guild where like 17 people are fine raiding a lot over the holidays and like 3 people either can't or really don't want to, then I still think it's pretty negative in those guilds too, which is why I'm still kind of sus of the holiday release timing. But maybe that's the kind of thing where like down in heroic guilds and stuff where it's flex raid size, it really doesn't matter as much.
I think it's really gonna hit y'all's guilds the hardest, like the world 5th through 75 guilds probably is going to hit the hardest, where you're like right at the peak of progression when Christmas hits, like on week 2 or 3 or whatever, and it's like you're on the last 3 bosses or something.
Yeah.
Whereas like any other guild that's lower than that, I think it's not going to be super impactful.
I have had 2 previous experiences where my prog has been disrupted by the holidays, and I have hated it both times. I had Trial of Valor and last expansion launch with Nathria be disrupted by the holidays, and just every single time I end up, whenever you come back, like you end up taking a week and a half or sometimes 2 weeks off depending on who's not available, and you come back and you're like always pretty salty about it, and you're just like, man, I feel like we wasted so much time. We lost so many ranks due to this. This is like a lot of, it really sucks. Obviously, I'm in the extreme minority here, but I don't like it. I fucking hate every single time it lines up with the holidays.
Well, I think it's
Yeah.
actually a net benefit for a lot of people too. Like people that are in school and not like in these top guilds, or like people that work have this extra time off where they can just go hide away and play WoW for a little bit. You know,
I
like,
mean, are
people love that?
Are people not visiting their families over the holidays? That's what, because like most of the time, that's what I'm doing, right? Like I'm visiting family and doing things that aren't. I mean, now I'm like only casting a race roll first at this point, but like normally I'm visiting family and stuff that's not related to WoW during the holidays.
No, I'm sure there's a mix of both.
I do think that like the average player probably has a lot more free time between like December 25th and 31st than they do during the rest of the year on an average week. But
Yeah.
how much of that can they actually leverage into doing raid content? Because that's like scheduled, and it's kind of hard to like, especially Mythic, right? You can't just spam Mythic raid a bunch for 2 weeks and then just despawn from it whenever January rolls back around without it. Like that's like Race to World First schedule type stuff, right? That's a typical player. A typical guild is certainly not going to be able to do that, because even if there's a few people in the guild that would be down to like go hard because they got nothing going on over the holidays, you need everybody to, and there's going to be some people that don't have that time for
Yeah,
like pugging heroic raid though, that kind of stuff. Like a player that progresses the game through pugging normal and heroic raid, I think those sorts of players, yeah, this release schedule is probably perfect for them, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of players that do that are probably at home or have extra time over the holidays. But yeah,
Which isn't even necessarily our main viewer base, but I think the majority of players, this is probably just fine for them. You know.
Maybe.
yeah, it's tough.
I think it really just depends on the person. I think that goes person to person, but like I think that there is a massive disruption, right? I think that like even regardless, if it was just like a random Tuesday in August or like a random weekend in August, like it wouldn't even be an issue.
Oh yeah, true.
Okay, so that was one kind of thing we picked out of the Morgan Day interview. We can go back and kind of go through this a little bit more point by point as well. One of the other things they talked about was class tuning. During alpha and beta, we saw some specs get frequent iteration while others got less. How often can we expect class tuning once the expansion launches? Are there plans for a specific schedule? Yes, there is a cadence we're trying to stick with. Essentially, weekly updates as we go into the initial launch. So that's up until launch from now.
Yeah.
And then that will kind of spread out over time. Players might have even noticed there's kind of a cadence leading up to the raid launch and post raid launch as well, as we look at things like Race to World First. There's very much balance changes that happen at the beginning of our Mythic launch, where with Heroic and Mythic launching on the same week this time, we've had to take an eye towards how we might want to adjust that. So it would totally be possible we might need to make a few adjustments the week of raid launch, but if we did do that, it would be pretty early in the week. We would be sure to communicate to the community, and also, as with all things, with our philosophy there. When we look at tuning from a live perspective, we like to kind of maintain the relative balance of things. If we see a class that might be massively overperforming and we need to make a major or make adjustments, the goal isn't to put them in the middle of the pack. We want classes to have major strengths and weaknesses. It's just sometimes the gap might need to be tweaked a bit. So there are plans for post-launch to continue with live balancing, always a work in progress. So the key thing here is that he's not really like ruled out any specific time for balancing, but they do have the stated goal of like the best spec would still be the best spec after they nerf it, I guess.
That's kind of how it always is, right? Like I can't think of a time where a spec got buffed from being like a hotfix buffed in the middle of a patch being like a below average spec to being like in that top echelon. Like more often than not, they slap the outliers a little bit and they try to bring the people at the top down just a little bit, and they don't really disrupt the meta in that way. And then they bring up the bad specs just a little bit, and they try to not disrupt the meta that way.
Yeah, and that's why I always say that if you're looking to play a meta spec, you definitely don't want to pick like the best spec leading into Mythic or on beta. You want to pick like somewhere on the above average zone where it'll safely remain in that zone.
I think that like what he said though is pretty fair. Like I think that he does admit though that they're going to have some issues without heroic and mythic being separate, because normally they have used heroic as kind of that tuning knob to be like, oh, is there something that we missed that is a little bit more out of line than we initially thought? And now they just don't have that, and so they're like, well, now we have to be a bit more conscientious of these kind of things.
Right, saying they're trying to do it early in the week is a good thing to know. That does mean there still might be like the opportunity to do some surprise heroic splits for whatever they buff or whatever, for whatever you swap to after they nerf it. Because it used to be that like you would do heroic week, right?
Yeah.
Friday of heroic week, they would like announce the class tuning that was coming on Mythic week launch. Mm-hmm. And then you would still have the time to do some last minute splits to prep whatever characters changed in your flowchart based off of those tuning things. So yeah, I mean, this is going to be super impactful. Like whether they announce the hot fixes on NA morning or NA evening are going to be important things for Race to World First. But I don't think that's like something they should try and avoid. I think just trying to balance the game to be good and have the Race to World First react to the situation on the ground is kind of how it always has to be.
With what he said, I'm kind of okay with it. Like, as long as they're trying to just be a little bit more aggressive with their tuning, especially early on, it'll probably end up okay. Like, they're gonna have to do something unprecedented where they're gonna slap down a nerf on some specs, maybe the second week of the raid, which is what they normally like try to avoid. But like, assuming that they're giving it the lens of, okay, we're trying to not disrupt the meta, it'll most likely be fine.
I did think that it was really vague talking about the balance frequency. It almost sounded like he was giving an answer of like, oh, we'll probably do it how we usually do it, but we'll try to do it a little quicker. But like the rate at which they usually do it is really, really slow after the first couple of weeks of a patch.
It's weird because it was faster in Sepulchre than we'd ever seen it before, but it was still slow relative to like what the player base desires. I think it's just like a weird situation where the player base is like, just like their expectations of like how frequently tuning is going to happen has misaligned. I wouldn't say misaligned, but it's changed so much over the years that Blizzard is still trying to keep up, because we had like a ridiculous amount of class tuning relative to other patches, and it still wasn't enough.
It was still too late. Like it was far after people were geared on their warlocks and blood decays when they tried to over nerf them. They had to pull back because of that. If they weren't that late, they probably could have kept almost the original buffs, maybe or original nerfs, and just maybe toned them down a tiny bit instead. But it was just too late.
They also cover here that basically TLDR of this question is they're going to try and do major updates to class trees on X.1 patches, like X.0, or not on the X.5 basically. So yeah, not in the middle of PvP seasons and M+ seasons and stuff. So on the season boundaries are where they're planning to make those sorts of revamps. They still haven't really said exactly how much of those changes we'll see on like in the middle of an expansion as well. I suspect probably won't be too many like huge talent tree overhauls in the middle of the expansion at all, but the ones that won't be on the X.5 patches.
Well, I mean, they can. They've proved on the beta that they're able. They have the technology to be able to hotfix change talent trees.
Right.
Like they can.
But what they're saying is that
we're not going to.
Aren't going to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably, like mostly. Then they talked about the 40% health and damage change, and this was kind of the same answer as the first blue post they made about making the gameplay a little bit more tactical, slowing down the pacing, and yeah, there's other changes. Other Fallout might be the wrong word, but other changes that went hand in hand with that. Things that players quickly identified was a lot of our tank tuning was something we wanted to keep an eye on, because a lot of tanks have percent-based healing for themselves. So that will change differently than the classes that don't do percent-based healing. And hybrid healing also something that they've wanted to adjust to. Feeling good about a lot of the adjustments. There's been some blood decay changes coming in, some other classes that are getting tweaks based on those larger game-wide changes. Brewmaster's still crying out in pain, as a tank that is extremely reliant on like external healing, right? Not like at a specific time, but just like throughput over the course of a minute, you need to be coming in externally. Yeah.
Dude, Brewmaster is tragically bad right now. It is so bad. Blood Decay is really good. Talking from those points in the paragraph you just read.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope they don't come out and get surprised whenever we see double Holy Paladin for a lot of healing comps. Like, I don't know, man. That healer spec is really good now after these changes.
Then they talk about healer damage. Is healer damage the delta between the best and the worst healer damage healers too big? And something they talk about often. Healer damage is a part of that package they might bring, but there's a lot of other elements to it too. What kind of utility they're bringing, what's their throughput, what do their major cooldowns look like, and damage is certainly an element of that. We prefer healers are spending their time healing, so the combat and encounter team are in constant communication about what kind of damage output we should be putting out there. Not just avoidable, but unavoidable as well. The community calls it rot damage, how much is ticking away at you. We keep an eye on healer damage. In the grand scheme of things, it's much smaller than, say, what a DPS or in a lot of cases even what your tank is doing. When you're talking about Mythic Plus, 1/5 of your group is your healer, so any damage they can put out is going to add up over the course of a M Plus run, versus if you're in a 20 or even 30-person raid, you know that healer is a much smaller percentage there, which is not true. You have 4 healers in a 20-person raid. That's also 4 over 20 is famously 1 out of 5.
This is
Famously.
awful answer. I think that it's so bad. I think that this is actually pretty disconnected.
Yeah, I think that it's fine for a healer to be doing less damage and more on the other package, but I do think they consistently underrate the value of high damage healers for difficult content.
Well, so like, especially there are like major issues with the fact that Disc is going to like passively in raid be doing somewhere between 10 and 15k DPS, not factoring in power infusion. And then there are other healers that if they are pressing primarily healing spells, they're only going to be doing like 2 to 3k DPS. And so there is just no world where some class should be doing 5 times the amount of damage as another one. You just have to look at it in like orders, right? Like the order of magnitude of how much more damage like that healer can do fully passively is a major problem. Then if at the same point, looking at it from like an M plus angle, whenever like Preservation Evoker or Ardruid is able to do damage, they're obviously doing the highest amount of DPS, but they have the downside of like not being able to do that passively, but they do like a decent amount more than these passive damage healers. And so like there has to be some give and take, and it's like they're balancing for healer damage. It has to get closer. I don't think that the where it sits right now is acceptable personally.
Yeah, I agree.
Here's a question that lines up pretty closely with something we talk about a lot. Historically, threat has been a problem that has needed a buff for most, if not all, patches in the past. Which is true. The amount of patches that have included a threat buff outnumbers the ones that haven't in the games like since 7.0. What is your current philosophy on threat, and how do you feel it still has a place in this game? And then, yeah, it's a great question. And difference in scaling, something they point out here, because obviously DPS tend to kind of scale harder than tanks in damage, except for when they get Blood Death Knights, the 4-piece and the gavel type stuff. And yeah, tank threat, not a big issue on a patchwork encounter, which they've succeeded at. Tank threat has only ever been an issue against a higher damage tank on something like a patchwork encounter in the past while. But then they talk about Legion here, where it's like a tank could run in, hit a single AoE button, and then they'd have a threat lead and could kite all the rest of the way through, which, yeah.
You know what's the weirdest part of this thing? I actually kind of agree with some of the parts that he says, but I think that he just frames these completely differently than how I feel about him. He says something at the beginning that's something that we don't feel like it should. You should have to be constantly battling with threat. Like it's like you should, as a tank, if you're hitting the mobs, you should always have threat as a tank. And I agreed with
which
that.
Which we all agree with.
And then he also said that threat is important, and we don't really want tanks to have this Legion situation where they are like only tanking for 10% of the pull and then walking away from 90%. I agree that that's also a problem. But the way that he's framed this answer, I feel like he doesn't understand like what the solution should be. Or maybe he's just he doesn't have a solution.
Here's the thing, from like seeing their process of like buffing it last patch, which took so much feedback to get them to buff it, or 2 patches ago actually.
Yeah, okay.
They don't understand how much of a problem it actually is. Like at the highest level, tanks are spending every single global possible to maintain threat, and they're barely hanging on most of the time. Versus any three of their high bursting DPS on every single pull, because lots of times CDs are desynced, so they're like battling a different person at any given time. But it's never like too comfortable the last two patches where you're in a significant margin over the DPS. You're always like pretty close to losing threat. Like if you have to spend a couple utility globals, especially early on, you're probably going to lose threat and someone's going to die. And I think they think that's not the case. Like they think if you're in melee, you're probably way ahead of threat on the meters over DPS.
I mean, I've seen people like even still in beta, like rep pallies will wait 6 seconds into a pull and they'll pop all their CDs and just fucking die. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think your answer
And
to them
it's-
is, oh, you should wait longer. But the answer realistically should be, why does the tank not have threat? Like we are nearing 10 seconds into the pull after he pops his wings and divine storms a couple of times before he dies. But like, why does the tank not have threat?
And that's because tuning is as they've been tuning from behind this entire time since they nerfed threat so hugely at the end of Legion.
Yeah.
Where they wait until it's bad, it's in a terrible state to actually buff it instead of just pre-buffing it like they probably should every patch, where DPS scale up higher than tanks will, because they know that. He even said that in the article. They should just pre-buff threat by like a little margin, every single patch, and they'll avoid this problem. But they just wait too long every time.
Yeah, it's tough because like I think the problems with threat on both sides tend to happen in the very high end groups. Like when threat was super OP, it's not like average groups were abusing it by kiting. And with threat the way it is now, it's not like average groups have DPS that rip off of the tanks even necessarily, right? It's like it's in the good groups where you start having the players that are like aligning their cooldowns and blasting on pull to the point of ripping off the tank, whereas tank DPS rotations tend to be pretty simple, and so you usually are achieving a higher percentage of your sim DPS as a bad tank than as a bad DPS.
Yeah, I mean, even in average groups too, like
Yeah.
Tells was saying, a rat pally can walk into a pull and just instantly die if they even press the rotation 3/4 as well as they should.
Right.
It's just,
I think
you're right. At the highest level, it's definitely more exaggerated.
I think what it calls for is a different solution than what they currently have. Like I think threat they needs to come in and they need to think, okay, how do we
Yeah.
solve this problem of tanks are able to kite and have threat the whole time without having any case where a tank that is in combat with mobs pressing globals on them every global is losing threat to DPS that are also just pressing their buttons, right? Like a tank that's going in and even pressing a cooldown on pull, right, is losing threat. Those two cases are both failure cases. I would argue that the latter case is a much worse failure case even than the kiting one. But even if you think they're equally bad, or if you think this one's worse, I think we could agree that they're both failure cases. And
100%, yeah.
I agree.
And I think
yeah,
they need to tune around the worst possible situation for threat as long as the tank is in melee. Like they need to identify the lowest damage AoE tank versus the highest possible DPS AoE. Like,
Burst DPS?
yeah.
yeah.
And they
I
need
think
to
it's
tune
fine
around
if it's
that.
a case of like, okay, exactly rat paladins with exactly guardian druids or whatever needs to be really careful.
That's actually the exact feedback I gave them. And I don't think they do that still. I think they balance around like the average, which is terrible because like there's always going to be one or two tanks that are going to fall behind and just be miserable for people to play. So they're not going to play them as much.
Somebody was saying in chat that maybe they should look to add like a threat decay mechanic on times that you're not actively pressing damage globals on the mobs. Maybe a more aggressive decay.
Yeah, or like a range-based thing, right? Like there's already to rip threat off of a mob, you need to be at 110% of the tank's threat if you're in melee, or 130% if you're at range. But they could do something else where like the tank could just have their threat multiplied by a modifier of 2 times as much threat if they're in melee, 1 times as much threat if they're within 10 yards, and 0.5 times as much threat if they're 30 yards or more away, right? Like that. Those sorts of changes to the system could be made that would make it so that like if you're kiting you're going to lose threat, whereas if you're not, like if you're in melee with the mobs you're not going to lose threat.
I think it's clear that the threat thing is not just solved by buffing I guess buffing the threat number does fix it again, but like I don't think it's so easily solved by that.
Yeah, I mean, they should make some kind of big change. I should say, though, that this whole problem is slightly less of an issue now that Necrotic's gone. Necrotic really exaggerated this problem. And, like, as soon as the tank left melee, you're probably losing threat. And you were doing it because you had to, right? It was so bad.
Skittish was an affix at one point.
Also, like, Necrotic gave you this issue of, like, choosing to between committing defensive and offensive globals, right? And that like you die either way, right? Because you lose threat and then you die because you try and get threat back, versus you hold threat but you did it by pressing offensive cooldowns and now you've got 40 stacks necrotic and you're dead. It's that was a difficult choice that there was some real skill expression there, but wow, was it really hard to do a lot. Like it made the tank roll that week much harder than the other ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We can skip that one, I think.
Yeah. During the initial talent tree development, we saw many raid and party buffs get added. Many of them were removed, like Skull Banner, or some of the other ones they took out. Restless Crew for Outlaw.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So sad. It's so messed up.
How do you feel about raid and party buffs now? Well, we're launching the game, so we're pretty comfortable with where we're at now. Lamau.
Good answer.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, I know this was a major topic of conversation throughout the community, and as we were looking into Dragonflight, we were building this new talent system. Interesting choices, build diversity were goals, supporting our party, bringing buffs, buffing friends, having that altruistic gameplay that I wanted to chase was something we wanted to explore in the design space. So we found the line, walked it back a bit, and made some additional changes as we were exploring this design space. Shaman spells, and actually not just shaman spells, that got changed from party to nearest allies, so that group management element that the group leader might have to deal with was a bit lessened as well. Still some elements of that we think that are cool, but we definitely took a look where we thought that was interesting versus where we could loosen that up. Pretty happy with where we landed, but with all things Dragonflight, there's always the opportunity to make changes based on feedback, and if something doesn't play out the way they're looking for, they're open to make adjustments. So basically 2 paragraphs of not really answering what the philosophy is on raid and party buffs in terms of like, I guess like a rebuttal to the concerns that people have with them, or even just an affirmative defense of. I guess there is a little bit of this. The buffing my friends altruistic gameplay is the reason they want them.
I think the next answers are way more telling about.
Yeah,
talking about 10 of the classes having raid buffs and 3 not.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, that's weird.
10 spots in raid essentially being locked in due to raid buffs and debuffs. Shaman, DK, and Hunters without this. I don't know that everyone would feel that way. There are people who are pushing really hard in Mythic raiding progression. There's certainly an element of strategic choice where you get to determine on this encounter, is this thing this class brings worth having 1 fewer of this other spec who might be really good? They had a strategic choice there. So that feeling required wouldn't be the goal. It's never the goal with something like that. We just want players to feel like they have cool buttons and cool options to bring to the table. A major focus on those buffs is class versus spec. If a specific spec is bringing something that felt unique to a group, that was where we really took a laser focus. Is that too narrow?
Is that even an answer to the question, though?
Yeah, I think it does kind of underrate the value of like it's not like, oh, is this an encounter where I would like 5% more magic damage? Yes, it is. They all are.
Do you have any logs on hand from like your raid testing or anything that you can pull up? Because I'm going to rant about this for a little bit.
Sure, I'll try and find some.
So let's just take Chaos Brand as an example. It's a 5% magic damage increase. Let's say half your raid is doing magic damage. So that's a 2.5% buff to your entire raid. If in these logs that we're about to look at from Dratnos, the amount of people that so let's go hit damage done. The amount that's going to be gained by 2.5% is ridiculous. So at the upper end, some people are doing around 5% damage on or on the lower end, some people are doing around 5% damage of your whole entire raid. On the higher end, people are normally doing between 8 and 9%. Obviously, Cryptix is doing something, but normally on the higher end, people are doing around 8% or so. Giving them 2.5% damage, that is by far the most valuable position in your raid, bar none, and it's not close. It is the difference between like a healer and or a tank and an actual DPS's worth of damage. It is. I think that the way that he described this, I don't think he understands like how much power is gained by these raid buffs. And so then all 10 of these buffs effectively, so it's like 9 and then whatever warlocks bring some
which a warlock is effectively required as well. Like if you're trying to raid without a warlock, that I feel like that's the first thing you need in your raid, because you remember that week without summons in Castle Nathri? That was the worst week of my life.
Yeah, so it's like
that was awful.
Or like Mark of the Wild is 3% damage. It is literally straight up
and 1.5% DR as well.
Yeah, you get DR.
Like it is
Devo
maybe better
basically.
Yeah, it's maybe better than Chaos Brand in some situations, even for this. And it's just like, okay, so you're your worst case scenario, you're bringing like I don't know whatever the evoker buff is, some garbage.
Blessing
but,
of
like,
the Bronze is not a required raid buff. Yeah, that thing is fake. That's who cares?
That is fake.
How are you
I was gonna
supposed
say
to
that.
fit? How are you supposed to fit a shaman, a death knight, or a hunter into your raid comp? Okay, sure. DK has some mandatory requirement utility on occasional fights. Like look at Anduin, for example. DKs were mandatory for their grips. This raid buff is mandatory for every boss,
Well, actually, DK does have something. They have the attack speed slow now. It's like a 20%
which is worse than
slow.
Rogue. It's worse
Yeah,
than
you
Rogue's
can put
attack
on-
speed slow.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't even overlap.
No,
No.
Oh, never mind.
it is literally worse than the Rogue one.
I
So
didn't know that.
Yeah, they do have AMZ, which I think when you're talking about like raid cooldowns, that also is something that's in that conversation as well.
I mean,
But
they also have a battle res, but like
the battle, I don't think the battle res is in the conversation in the same way, really. Like, okay,
Yeah.
in some raids, it's like annoying that you don't have a lot of battle reses, but it's never like battle res and bloodlust are not something that are ever vital resources that you're considering about a clap. But AMZ, legitimately, you know, there are fights where it's like, okay, we have 2 AMZs here. This is nice extra cooldown coverage.
I think that he undersells healer DPS and the raid buffs being locked in heavily in some of his answers so far.
Yeah.
I think the hunter and shaman need something, right? Like that's the biggest.
DK,
Set of
I would argue,
outliers.
also needs a raid buff, man. Like, I don't know.
I think not quite as much as the other two, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Enhance
tough.
is honestly the only spec that out of all of these that doesn't even need one because of what Wind Fury is.
Although even there, it's like, you know, there's a fight where you're not bringing melee that scale with Wind Fury very much, then your enhance doesn't get a spot either, right? It's like there, it's a question of like, okay, is the spec just pumping a lot of damage, right? But yeah,
I did some research. There have been 3 bosses since raid buffs have launched with like Battle Shout, Arcane Intellect, and Fort, where the raid in Chaos Brand, where the raid buffs have not been brought. Mithrax, Ugunot, and Lords of Dread are the only 3 bosses in 2 full expansions that have not had all of the raid buffs, and 2 of those when you could scroll the buff instead of bringing
Oh
it.
yeah, Una was no Windwalker probably, or no, they probably ran Brewmaster.
you had a
actually.
brew on that fight, I think. Yeah,
It was
that was no battle
warrior.
shout, right? Yeah,
It was no
'cause
battle shout.
You,
yeah.
you were playing
yeah.
you were playing 14 ranged, and they all had the trinket from Opulence, right? And they were stacked on top of each other. Yeah,
Yeah, it was a range fight.
Lords of Dread was the same thing, right? Where it was like Lords of Dread, it was like we're only playing 2 ranged, so we don't need.
So you don't need AI.
We don't
right?
need AI,
Like,
right? Because
yeah.
we don't have any intellect users really, and we can't afford another ranged because of the way that fight works. Yeah.
Well, they were. Mage was also just bad at that fight too. So
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
that just it's ridiculous.
Right. Whereas if you look at the number of bosses where you could play without a shaman or without a hunter, like we're world first guilds played without a hunter or a shaman or whatever, it's like all the time they're dropping those
Yeah.
bosses on fights.
One full tier you could go without that class.
Right. You wouldn't notice. In some tiers is fine. But like there has yet to be a fight without a Chaos Brand since Chaos Brand got added to the game. So
Literally true. Yes.
Hunter's the weirdest one for me because like that's a pure DPS class. Like they don't have a backup option to be brought to raid if the raid buff isn't mandatory or if their damage is low. Like they have to be both insane on damage and like able to live to be brought to any kind of hard encounter.
Can you imagine the bitchin' if Shaman, Hunter, and DK did 2.5% more damage than your whole entire raid?
That's the
not
thing.
Not just in one player, than your whole raid.
Well, the thing is though that there's an inherent safety valve to Chaos Brand being OP, which is the second Demon Hunter doesn't bring a Chaos Brand, right? But if Hunter is doing 2.5% more damage, or like 2.5% more of the raid's damage, right? So if they're doing 50% more damage is the actual
Yes.
like more thing than the next class, right? You would stack hunters, right? So
Yes.
this creates a safety valve and it creates pressure towards a rainbow comp of like every class being in, except it's not every class because there are 4 classes that don't have vital raid buffs. But
This
you know,
answer
the
sucks. I
heavy
think the
incentive
answer
to always
sucks.
having one DH, it makes it so that it's not something that is likely to be called out as a problem, because to a casual observer, this looks like a good, healthy raid comp, right? Because, oh, look, there's one of like each different thing. It's a nice balanced game, right? Whereas, especially when there's a couple classes that don't have a reason to be in there, right? And it's like you're sitting there trying to get a raid spot as a hunter in a tier where hunter's doing low damage. It's a very unfortunate state of affairs.
Do you think we could ever petition Kira from Warcraft logs to add raid buffs
Chaos
in your
Brand?
damage? And if it's like if you have 2 demon hunters, you just split it between the 2 of them.
I mean, unironically, Spell Reflect got nerfed. I would say in a lot of cases, and a lot of the dungeon effects where Spell Reflect was OP, that would have continued to be OP until it got added to details meters and people started like, do you remember first boss of Underrot took 50% of its health and damage from a Spell Reflect, basically? Like that was something where before that was on details, it flew under the radar. But I think if it was on logs or details, then yeah, I'm
add
sure
it to the
people
class,
wouldn't be,
and then people would be like, "What the fuck?" And then you hover over their top damage on the whole entire raid is Chaos Brand.
It would be, yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it would be
Mark of the Wild, #1 DPS. Like, all
That's
right,
true.
cool.
I totally forgot about that. Chaos Brand and Mystic Touch would definitely be nerfed to shreds if that was the case. If that was like clearly showing how much damage they did.
Okay.
Just mauled a little bit. Sorry, my bad. This episode's clearly going long. I think that I've realized this right now.
Do we have other? I mean, yeah, I don't want to go too long, but do we have other bits from these interviews?
I think the drums question is the last one we realistically need to hit here.
Okay. One more to follow up on that. We had drums nerfed in Shadowlands. Do you consider Lust to be a raid buff? Many players felt that Lust classes always needed an M+ due to the nerf of drums. Do you feel like this change has played out how you wanted it to? Yes, we're pretty happy with the change that was made in Shadowlands. The main goal was we wanted you to feel like we recognize how important Bloodlust is. So we do want you to have an option there. It's just what's the delta between we don't even need to worry about Lust because we've got drums versus this is a huge advantage to still try and get this class into our group or into our raid. The area we did actually take a really close eye on is that we've been adding a lot of classes, DKs, DHs, monks, and evokers. None of those classes had Bloodlust. So the percent of classes that could bring Bloodlust diminished over time. So they added Bloodlust to evokers. Yeah.
After playing a whole expansion of Mythic Plus with the nerfed drums, I really, really don't like the change where they nerfed drums that much. It was so miserable playing without a Lust class. And even though it was probably not required most of the time, it just felt really bad. Like you pressed drums and like hardly anything happened. You barely noticed it.
You know, it's funny in a 5-man. I bet Chaos Brand and drums provide about the Chaos Brand and Lust provide about the same value, except one of them is in 35 seconds and the other one is over the course of the whole dungeon.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, yeah. You know, there's a good meme. If you open up LFG right now and you type Lust, I bet there are groups that pop up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I do think this is a really good idea to add evokers to the Lust list because first of all, you're probably going to see a lot of evokers this expansion. They're going to be tuned pretty well, hopefully. That'd be the goal, I bet. And now there's 3 classes that bring it, so you're much more likely to have a Lust in the group.
4 even, right? It's Hunter, Shaman,
Mage.
Oh yeah, 4.
Evoker, yeah. I will say, like, I'm not super against the drums being half as good as Lust thing. A lot of the keys I did last season were without Lust or were with drums, and it's like, well, you can feel it being worse, but I actually feel like the state of Lust and M+, where it's like there's 4 classes that bring it. You want to bring one, but you don't. It's not like you can't play without it. Like I feel like that's actually reasonably okay there, and it's definitely fine for raid. It's like everybody agrees. It's totally fine in raid. You
always have a Lust. You always have a Lust. Like, can you imagine?
I think I would probably just split the difference with the drums and bring it up to 20% from 15, and be pretty happy there because it used to be 25, right? Then it got nerfed to 15, and real Lust is 30. So I do think I would tweak it upwards a little bit probably, but I don't think it's like egregiously bad or anything like that. I think it's like it does feel bad to be playing without a Lust, but like
I just don't like the situation where we're like I'm sitting in Cord with people and we're talking about potential comps, and then somebody goes, "Okay, yeah, that sounds great and all, but who's bringing Lust?" And then you go, "All right, well, I guess we have to drop this DPS for a mage, or we have to drop this DPS for a Devastation Evoker." And I'm like, "Oh,
yeah."
That's the problem with raid buffs. Like they're definitely designed for raid, and then Mythic Plus like just changes the game and like makes it a little like distasteful to build a group around sometimes.
I think that the buffs are fine. I think it's Lust and honestly B-Res as well are
right. It's so weird because Lust and B-Res are not a problem in raid, but they are in M+, and Chaos Brand and Mystic Touch are a problem in raid, but they're fine in M+, right? Like having Chaos Brand and Mystic Touch are totally fine in M+.
It's because in 5-man groups,
so true.
Yeah.
Well, it's because in 5-man groups, like your damage is dealt by those 5 players, and so 2.5% of your groups or 5% magic damage increase is 5% more group damage at like a worst case scenario. Whereas like 5% raid damage across 20 players is a ridiculous amount.
Yeah. okay, yeah, then there's a little bit more in here. Stuff about GCD plans. Same kind of answer here. No current plans to take any more stuff off the GCD. I feel like they've been doing a pretty good job of like most on GCD cooldowns now do something when you press them as well. And so I think it kind of feels fine. Like Dragon Rage lobs a pyre at things, right? And that's like that. Those sorts of things. I feel like it's a lot less bad than it was either in BFA, right, where it was like some classes had literally 5 globals where they were on global and didn't do anything initially. Nowadays, I think that's a lot better. I still think like Death Grip and stuff off GCD, like defensives and utility stuff off GCD, obviously feels a lot more reactive to play as. Like that feels better. But those are really powerful abilities. I guess I kind of understand nerfing them that way. Then discussion of build diversity. I'm pretty sad, I guess, about how the talent trees have worked with effects like Solar Beam, Hex, Tremor Totem, those sorts of things, where it's like, because they're so situational, it's like really hard to imagine actually talenting them because there's good passive damage options or passive survivability options that you can just take, right? It's like you're choosing between like Solar Beam or 10% damage on your sim, right? And it's like, is there any case where we can't just find another way than Solar Beam and I can do 10% more damage, right? It's like,
you just saltily talent the Solar Beam is what actually ends up happening. You just get pissed. You're like, okay, I'm clicking it.
I do feel like that's like an unfortunate thing.
I think talent trees need a lot of work. I think like looking at the tank talent trees that I've been messing with for a while now, like there's one in particular that's really, really good, and that's Vengeance, where they have like 2 really, really solid build options that you can just completely redo your tree and have like 2 very strong builds, and they're kind of balanced and they do different things. Whereas like on the other end, Brewmaster and Bear have like 1 talent build. Like there's no other option really, and there's not even like defensive options as a tank either. Whereas Vengeance and Brought Warrior have all these great defensive options if they were to need them. So I think they like, in addition to the utility, they need lots of work in that aspect.
It's like, I mean, I just think that there's an issue that there's like no parity in the class tree. Like there is an issue. I think it's ridiculous that Disc and Holy don't have access to interrupts. I think it's ridiculous that 3 classes have their interrupts baseline with rogues, evokers, and mages, but then there's this situation where Moonkin and Spriest have to do some weird shit to get their interrupt. I just think that there's like, for utility, like an interrupt, which is a core function of how a decent amount of mechanics work in modern day WoW. It just feels like it's not optional. Like it's not really optional to not run an interrupt in some situations. There's no decision to be made. I'm talenting it.
Yeah. That is weird that like some classes have it by default pretty much, and others have to go way out of the way to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the talent trees where I'm choosing between different types of utility to fill out my kit, but those are definitely the exception rather than the rule. Most of them, it's like you have like you pick like a couple of the utility pieces because they're on your way to damage, and any extra points you put into utility take you away from damage.
Can you imagine going into an arena and somebody doesn't have fucking interrupt talented?
Yeah. Solo shuffle. Get to play against them more often than you have to play with them.
Like
the
default Moonkin talent doesn't have any interrupts selected. Like the starter
build. They know their audience. They know their Moonkins.
It's fine, but like I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know if for starters, I don't know if I would also select them to have an interrupt there. But like, what the hell?
Every monk player, all 3 specs are going to do Shadow Moon Burial Grounds without a dispel like the first 5 times they do it before they remember to actually talent into it.
I gotta remember to talent dispel in what is it, Ruby Life Pools and Algathar. I think the 2 that you need the Druid dispel in.
Is there curses or poison?
There's a poison in Algathar. In Ruby Life Pools.
Oh yeah, the tree boss.
I'm trying to remember what it is. I can't remember anymore.
All right, then. Good.
No. I was done.
All right, yeah. Then the rest of this interview is some stuff about evokers, art questions and things. Question about M+ scaling. About like how fast they're expecting people to get to 20s. Should players be expecting to go to 20 week 1? Which like obviously is, very top end players only type thing that are going to be able to do that. So, and then how did you find heroic raid difficulty tuning in Shadowlands? It was a step up from BFA in previous expansions. Will we see that kind of heroic level tuning in Dragonflight? Evolves. So the answer here is it's a fun one too. It evolves patch over patch. Every time we release a new raid tier, the tuning kind of evolves and changes with the player base and the tools. And every raid, they're aware that it could be somebody's first ever raid. So we want to make sure that we have a close eye on the new player type, someone who's experiencing raids the first time. Maybe you start in normal and heroic's where you're going to end. Maybe there's some guilds that just start in heroic and then they graduate into mythic. So trying to be cognizant. Certainly can say with confidence Sepulchre Heroic was a lot harder than where we really wanted it to land. It was a larger raid that was 11 bosses versus 8 of the Vault. And it kind of felt, instead of adding some more raid bosses in the middle of Sepulchre, we just added more of those like penultimate difficulties, which is, not something we would do moving forward. Keeping an eye on Heroic and make sure that there's a clear progression. It doesn't feel like I'm at boss 8 and it really feels like the raid has just begun in terms of my progression. Want to make sure there's a clear ramp there. So that's kind of what I expected, right? Like that Sepulchre was definitely, especially on Heroic and doing Heroic, that was where I was like, oh man, this raid has gotten really hard really quick. And there's still 3 more bosses to go afterwards.
Yeah, that was very difficult.
Yeah, I mean,
for week 1.
Week 1, the interesting thing this time, though, is going to be that we were in way lower item level than relative to the content than we were in Sepulchre Heroic, too. So I expect that just because the raid tuning might be such that it's actually fairly easy, it might feel really hard the first few weeks because we're going to be coming in giga under geared, which, yeah, I think that should be kind of fun. I think gear nerfing the raids automatically every week is a good place for it to land.
Would you prefer if there was like a higher gear delta between tiers?
I don't think so. I think the 26 is a pretty reasonable amount of item levels.
No, I just mean like no, not between two independent raid tiers.
Yeah,
so
that's 26.
what we have right now is where Mythic is the exact same as next tier's Heroic or next tier's normal.
Yeah, that's 26.
Yeah, it's 26 side levels.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't mean okay, but I mean like, oh, I thought you were talking about from like normal to Mythic.
Okay, no, yeah, I'm
okay.
Yeah.
You think that between tiers it's okay?
I think so, yeah. I think
to not need to step foot into normal if you've already progged Mythic of last year?
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
I think that works pretty well. I don't know, like the start of expansion, big gap between how geared we are and how hard the raid is interesting there, but I guess I'm pretty happy we don't get that every tier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is kind of. It was interesting you said like we're going to be 372 walking into Heroic or Mythic. Like that's actually really, really low eye level compared to what most people are used to on week 1.
Yeah, I mean, remember Castle Nathria, like week 1 Castle Nathria Heroic farmed people. And, like everybody was kind of expecting it to be pretty easy, but then like a couple weeks later, they hadn't even nerfed the content except like they maybe nerfed Sire Denathrius a little bit or something, but then it was really easy on Heroic after that.
We didn't have legendaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We tried that shit without legendaries.
Okay, then we also have this Raider IO interview that we already looked at a little bit. One question I want to pick out from this one is Fated Raids. Huge experiment, Ian Hazakostas says about it, with the M+ season as well. Overall, I think it was successful. Fated Raids were not without flaws, but we feel it was successful. And looking at how people were participating, the feedback we've gotten, and our personal experiences, I think it beats having had another 3 months of Sepulchre, which is the alternative, which I really agreed with. So I think that I'm glad that they think Fated was a success, because I also think it was much better than 3 more months of Sepulchre. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
It was definitely better than Sepulchre, but I would have rather there have been another content patch.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that for what it was pretty good. I think the big thing with like season 4 and what we got is like you can kind of slam that together on a shorter time frame while not dedicating a ton of resources away from developing the next expansion.
Yeah, the big missing piece would be something for outdoor focused players, which definitely the Fated season didn't bring like a new zone or even like Fated versions of Shadowlands outdoor world content, which I do think they could do more of that for sure for those players. Are there plans to make changes to how the Hall of Fame functions? No current plans. So Yeah, it's conceivable that one of the world first guilds has 8 alliance members and 12 horde. They could have the community world first, yet not be in the Hall of Fame because they wouldn't have gotten the guild achievement. However, down the line, when, I'm not even going to say if, when cross-faction guilds become a thing, which is good, there are complexities to work through. At that point, we would shift to a single unified faction-agnostic Hall of Fame because it will truly not make sense to have that separation anymore, which I think everybody kind of expected this would be what they would do, but it's nice to hear them say it. Yeah.
Seems good to me. No complaints here.
Yeah, sooner the better. That'd be awesome. I got a race change, or I got a faction change back to Horde for my guild soon.
Have you got your title? Have either of you got your title yet? I need to
Not
get
yet.
my title so I can faction change.
Yeah, I also need to
I
get that
neglected to
delivered.
upkeep my title after I got the plug title, so there's no way I'm getting it.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you're like 50 points below or something. Yeah,
How are you doing, Shrouded Hero Dratnos?
not delivered yet, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm well above. I didn't abuse. Oh, we didn't talk about Zenkiki the Druid abuse.
Oh yeah, how do I know you guys actually got the title? Maybe you just.
I didn't abuse
maybe
Zenkiki.
You're saying you haven't gotten it yet, but you just.
I did all of my keys before the Zenkiki thing was even discovered, so there was no abuse from me.
I've only ever had Zenkiki the Druid in my quest log when I did the quest legitimately, like many years ago for Lore Master, and on beta when it was shared to me on beta. Somebody shared me Zenkiki the Druid on beta.
Somebody shared it to me on beta as well, and I'm just like.
But yeah, that for those who don't know, basically the Shrouded Hero buff, they actually they didn't move the cutoff down, so they kept the cutoff where it was, but they aren't going to give it to people that abused the Zenkiki the Druid quest, which was a quest that you could share, and then when you got it shared to you, you got a Mark of the Wild that gave you 5% primary stat and 10% stamina.
We talked about this last week on the show, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago on the show.
Yeah.
We were like, they're probably not going to do anything. I'm glad they did. Actually, like, you should not get away with doing bullshit like that.
Yeah, my stance remains. I didn't do it because I thought there was a chance that I thought it was unlikely, but obviously there was a chance you'd get in trouble for this. But I do wish there was more consistency and predictability about what you would and wouldn't get in trouble for, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was reported like 2 months ago is the thing, and they waited this long to do anything about it. But I'm glad they did. I'm glad they actually did something.
This just like will stop people from doing it next time because it's like, don't be an idiot.
Well,
this will likely at least it'll make you think. Oh wait, is this going to get me DQ'd?
It's tough because there's like a lot of different categories of things in M+, and to an outside observer, it doesn't really seem logical that like making Oshir jump onto the boat and not do any mechanics in Iron Docks is like totally kosher, right? And this is like the sharing Zenkiki is bannable, right? Yeah. But like obviously to us as M+ers, it's like, okay, yeah, moving a boss outside of its arena to not do mechanics is like a pretty normal thing, right? But then you have things like do you guys remember Freehold going in M0, fighting the turtle on M0, and then he wouldn't be active in M+, and you didn't have to fight him in M+, like because Trothak would already be hostile. Like that was never acted on. It was present in the game for 6 months, and you could do it, and then if you weren't doing it, you were missing out on 3 minutes every Freehold run, right?
In dungeon strategy, I think that there's a difference between inside of dungeon strategy versus outside of dungeon bullshittery, is how I would describe this. Like, which is Zenkiki the Druid buff and like permanent misdirection. Those are like game-ish, like
right.
Like
permanent misdirection wasn't punished either, though.
Well, very contentiously not punished, by the way.
Yeah, we should definitely mention that. Like a team 1 TGP using a very big exploit of like using permanent misdirection. I mean, they're play borders, and
since then they've been more like clear about rules, particularly in TGP and stuff. But I like the live server versions of it as well. I think a consistent expectation of what you can and can't get away with in M+ would be better, because like for raid we have a pretty good idea of what sorts of things are going to get you in trouble and what sorts of things aren't, right? Again, it's the sort of thing where if you're an outside observer, right, and it's like these guilds are abusing this jailer bug, oh
my god, they're all
getting banned, right? But like
Kel'Thuzad.
Yeah, all the guilds doing that, like, no, they're not going to get in trouble after the first couple don't get in trouble, right?
The jailer one, I'm actually surprised that nobody got banned over it, but it is what it is.
Dude, the sick part was we were trying so many different ways to get that bug to happen, and it happened due to a way we actually had no idea was how it caused it to happen.
Well,
we were trying to mind games it. We were mind games first sigil potioning to try and make a big mind games on the target, and it turns out it was just when
It
your
was just
tank was like
moving the boss.
5 yards out of melee in range and the boss
Yeah.
was walking. Yeah, and we just did that by accident, and yeah.
Did you guys know that week 1 of this previous season there was also a very, very similar bug with Zolgamax?
Yes.
Where if you moved him the exact same way, he would lose his shield too.
It wasn't a jailer movement bug. It was landing the interrupt frame perfect with when the shield went
that
up.
was also
They
for a period
also-
of time that was also
Yeah,
a thing, but
okay.
there was the
After
movement
they
one, too.
fixed the interrupt
Yeah.
thing, then you could jailer move
Yeah,
it
you
out
could
of the
jailer-
fucking
yeah.
cast. Yeah.
Yeah.
I DM'd Squishy DM'd me like the day that happened. He was like, "Guess what?"
Yeah.
I was like, "I already know. I found it."
I had like a clip of me doing that go on a Wowhead post, and everybody in the comments like, look at him acting surprised that happened. I'm like, I didn't know that was gonna happen.
I just divine told this mob, bro.
Yeah, just a little divine toll. But then after that, of course, I was trying to replicate it because
Why not? That's
that's cool.
That's a
Oh,
time
yeah.
game.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I guess the main point of like a consistent rule set for what sorts of things you will and won't get in trouble, get DQ'd, get banned over, would be nice. And I think coming with that would be like quicker reactions, right? Zenkiki getting detected, posted about, and fixed more quickly. And like as soon as it's posted about, saying like this will get you in trouble or whatever. But obviously, like that's hard, right? Like that's a hard thing to ask them to do. So
I mean, it's difficult to Blizzard to know these things, especially if they're okay. We all knew about it, but like if it does, how is not in the sense of like how is Blizzard supposed to know about these kind of things? Like, is their job to know about these kind of things? But at the same point, if there's only like 50 people who know about it, and all 50 of them happen to just be high-end M+ers, it's not something that Blizzard is going to likely like stumble into that information unless it gets posted like to the competitive WoW Reddit or something.
they need to cultivate
I mean-
informants in the high-end M+ scene.
I mean, we have informants. I straight up reported the Zenkiki thing 2 months ago.
Well,
I
Trell
think
is the
lots of other
rat.
people did too.
Yeah,
I don't care.
He's
I'll
the
report
narc.
that
well,
shit all day.
I said no snitches, and Troll said I'm snitching.
I
Yeah,
think it's just a matter of like they don't. Well, I don't want to be mean, but like sometimes they overlook important feedback,
It happens.
or maybe they don't have enough channels for it. So it's a combination of what all of us said. I think.
yeah, it's tough because like they're receiving a bunch of reports that either are false or not important, and lumped in with them as something like, hey, there's this quest in Western Plaguelands that you can get a buff that works in M+ with.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know. Okay. Any other questions from either? So then there's also this Max interview that has just happened. There's a Wowhead summary page. Actually, I should probably refresh because it's probably been updated. But of course, all 3 of these interviews here will have links to places to go watch them, and of course, just watch the whole thing. Especially because we're not going to be able to cover all of these things. Anything anybody wants to pull out though from either the Raider IO or the Max interviews here? Probably only time for 1 or 2 more, specific things to look at.
I'll scroll through the Raider IO and make sure that we didn't miss anything important while you can look at this one for Max real quick.
Okay, yeah. I guess team fully recognizes that the patch cadence in Shadowlands left a lot to be desired. Have a lot of plans to help address that, which I think that was kind of one of the core problems of Shadowlands has been that like patches that kind of would have been fine at 6 months were rough at 8 months, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that's going to be cool. The previous goal of seasonal affixes was to change routing, forcing players to make new pulls and try different strategies. With Dragonflight introducing new dungeons, this isn't necessary anymore, so Thundering is being designed to instead allow players to show coordination and mastery. It's not something you have to engage with since it can just be auto-cleared, but it also gives players room to min-max it. I kind of like this in theory, but I still haven't had any fun playing with Thundering yet, so I
really do. I
Yeah.
agree. I like it in theory. I think that over time we'll get a lot better at it, which is cool design, and we'll min max a lot better. I don't like the RNG. I don't like the RNG about it. Like as you change key levels and affixes, it's going to time differently on every pull, except for the very first pull. That's going to be the only consistent time across any dungeon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be like some groups will like. Let's say you align the 30% damage buff with the 50% damage buff you get on Odin. That is massive compared to not having 30% more damage when you're going to use your cooldowns. So it's going to vary keys quite a bit.
There's also something at the top about the vault. That's apparently important. As a result, I think it's the as a result. I think it's those two. Yeah, the one that's right above it as well.
Yeah. As a result, they're trying to be more cognizant of what they're asking players to do with their time. Dragonflight version of the Catalyst is part of that, no longer requiring flux, generating account-wide charges. Another idea they're kicking around is a catch-up mechanic to the Great Vault, potentially allowing players to loot multiple items if they miss a week, or making it easier for players with multiple characters to fill out their vault each week. That's cool. Because with more and more of our gear coming from the Great Vault, right? If you miss a week, you're more and more behind.
Yeah.
And then Mythic Plus and Raid Vault slots have parallels, but PvP is odd due to being based on rating, which can be awkward if you come in late to a season. They want to incentivize players to do the highest content they can, rather than a situation where you do 1 plus 20 key followed by a bunch of plus 2 keys. This is like Dorky's idea of your M plus vault is based on the highest key you've done, rather than like the highest and then the 4th highest and then the 8th highest. Yeah.
I think that, yeah, because it makes sense that it's like that, because the alternative is if you were doing PvP, you would just slam a bunch of 2s and use Valor up everything. They also mentioned that Valor is not going to be completely unlocked. There's still going to be some Valor gating. They've mentioned that somewhere. But I do think that he's right. Like, I don't want, if you're able to do a 20, I don't want you to be doing 2s. Like, 2s are...
Yeah, farming 2s... I agree farming 2s is something they shouldn't incentivize.
That is a mental prison.
The Valor and Cosmic Flux rewards from plus 2s were a huge problem for the purposes of incentivizing plus 2s in the last couple of seasons, yeah.
You should not be doing 2s unless you were like either brand new to the game, or like that is the first key that you've done on that character.
Yeah, I mean, farming low keys, like, I think there's a lot of people that are legitimately their M plus experience is like in the 2 to 7 range and stuff, but it's definitely like, if you're capable of doing 10s and 15s, you shouldn't...
Yes.
There shouldn't be an incentive for you to be spamming 2s, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, anything from the Raider IO interview you want to pick out?
I thought that the Raider IO review was pretty comprehensive. I don't think that anything was like super major that we needed to hit on.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I felt like all of the interviews were like really good. I think that we got a lot of information in regards to like just their general thought process.
Yeah. We are okay. So yeah, we're not going to go point by point through the Max one and the Raider IO one. Then we'll have links to all 3 of these in the description. Go read/watch all of them yourself. I'm sure you'll find stuff that is interesting in all of them. But for now, we'll move on to our tip of the week segment. My tip of the week is if you're doing the pre-patch event, the heirloom components that drop, the 4 BOA things, you can actually trade to anybody else that tagged the boss. They don't have to be in the same group as you. Anybody else that had the tag on the boss when it drops for you, you can trade to them. And in some places, there are people that'll post in general chat that they're buying them after the boss dies. Other times, it's just somebody will ask, like, does anybody have an extra? And if you happen to have an extra, you can give them away to somebody else that needs them. So that is a thing to know. It's not like, even though it's buying on account, it is anybody else that was eligible can get traded for the 2 hours after you loot it. Trell, what is your tip of the week?
So Tree Fee, friend of the show, who are our friend who really enjoys leveling. He's like super into speed leveling.
Yeah,
he's going to be competing here pretty quick on launch.
Is he competing?
I don't know if he's like officially competing, but he's going to do pretty well. I'm sure. But he told me if you craft a recipe for the first time with like any crafting profession, this is one of the crafting changes, and you do it while leveling, you actually get a lot of experience too. So you get like a whole quest's worth of experience if you craft a recipe for the first time. So you could actually, in theory, get like 3 levels of experience just like leveling up tailoring while leveling.
Did you hear what some of these sweatband people are doing with getting a warlock to summon them inside of Ruby life pools and then just tagging the last boss and then zoning out of Ruby life pools? Getting armies of Twitch chatters to do that. So because you can like only do it the first, like, because you can only do it one time. Like those characters can only like do the Ruby life pools thing one time.
They have to be different characters every time.
Yeah, so they have to be different characters.
Oh man, that is degenerate.
Like you can run the Ruby life pools once while leveling.
They're getting end of done. So I suspect it's going to be Now and Genji who end up doing this, if I had to guess. Okay. They're gonna get their Twitch chat viewers to summon them to end of Ruby life pools. They're gonna tag the boss, and then get the experience for the, like, completing the dungeon, right? But like the people are only able to do the dungeon one time because of something with like Ruby life pools and like how it is on like expansion launch.
Okay. Cool.
So they're gonna 4-man it for most of it, then summon them.
Summon them in. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, Treevy's doing it solo. I think he may have. He's asking for people to like mail him some materials, but that's about it. That's not nearly as bad.
Oh, you're mailing. Your whole guild is mailing him all of their mats. I heard a friend was telling me that he's convinced his guild to mail him all of their leveling mats so they can do this crafting profession quest that you're talking about.
I don't think the whole guild's doing it, but I volunteer to just like give him my cloth. I don't need the cloth, you know.
This is so messed up that you're feeding into the degeneracy.
I always think it's just cool to see what people get up to. It's like it's not like it matters or anything. It's like I don't know, literally just a fun race. And it's, I actually think it's really funny when it's like, okay, we got 4,000 people to summon us for this. Like, okay.
You also need
That's funny.
you also need like you need to complete the campaign anyway. So it's like, does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? No. Is it really funny to watch classic people get upset that now beat all of the classic people leveling? Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was funny.
I hope there's a gang of classic players that are going to steal world first retail from that'd be so funny.
So funny. Actually.
Yeah.
That would be so good
wish.
if they found some like weird shit and they stole it. That'd be so good.
Yeah. All right, we have a clip of the week here. Tettles, this one was actually sent to me via Twitter DM in Grimrail Depot.
I saw this.
Watch here and see what happens.
Yeah, this is nuts.
Yeah, you could just soul shape over to outside the train and.
So what's the? Is this like doable? Is this something that can be reproduced easily? Like,
I have no idea the
Probably.
conditions under which you could replicate that or anything, and like what it makes you vulnerable or safe to out there. But yeah, thanks
he gets
to Chicken
enough
Time for
speed
DMing me
from
that one.
Stamp Roar to jump off the edge and then soul shape out there.
Yeah, it looks like it. Like jump, stampeding roar, soul shape, and you can get over to the safe, past the kill box on that. So
Maybe these are where all the people, like whenever you knock mobs off the train, maybe that's where they're running on. Is that side box?
Maybe.
That's what it's for. Maybe.
All right. Pretty short. Second topic that we have here today is a discussion of what to do when the expansion launches. And there's a Dragonflight Raiders guide that's been being shared around that you can find that we'll link and stuff in the description and everything. But there's a guide that is being well maintained and has a bunch of info about when everything is coming out. And yeah, it's a very comprehensive list of different, builds that you'd go with different professions, the different renowns and reputations and how everything works there, all the item level charts that you might want to see, where the dragon riding glyphs are. There's a route that you can go through to grab a bunch of these really quick to get all of your dragon riding glyphs, which could be an early thing to do. But yeah, this is just a pretty cool resource for, I guess, learning about what's going to be happening in the new expansion if you are interested in that. So yeah, pretty cool little tool for that. What are you guys planning to be doing during the first couple of weeks of Dragonflight? So we're talking about there's 2 weeks, right? It launched on a Monday.
Yes.
And then we have immediately there's a Tuesday where we don't think there's going to be like a weekly reset there, right? It's not like that. There's not like a rush to level and do M0s so you can sneak them in an extra time, we think.
They've had a reset there previously, but it's not a lockout reset.
Right, it was I think last time it was just like M0 didn't open until then. Even.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
M0 didn't open until then. And so it wasn't like a traditional lockout reset. So I mean, the first thing that I'm gonna do, like, and probably the most important thing that you should be doing is like after you get your characters leveled, you really want to make sure your character is leveled that first week, and then you want to be doing like heroic dungeons or probably and mythic dungeons. So you really need to get that mythic dungeon lockout on all of the 8 Dragonflight dungeons completed. So whenever we've talked about M+ dungeons, we talked about these legacy dungeons sometimes. These are not the dungeons that you're going to be doing. You're not going to zone into Court of Stars and do that on an M0. Instead, you're going to be going into like
Brackentide Hollow.
Yeah, Brackentide Hollow and stuff like that. Exactly. And doing all of those as your M0 ones.
Yeah, that is kind of the only vital thing to do. And even then, we're talking about getting yourself gear that will be obsolete fairly early into the expansion, but it's still the best springboard to be geared for that first week of the raid. So, definitely
So
worth
there's
doing.
there are still primal storms that stay, and they allow you to buy like 359 gear, and you can upgrade that to 385. Do you know much about it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know a ton about the primal storms that are supposed to be staying.
It's like a season 1 world event thing that they'll be happening, and there'll be world events of various kinds. And yeah, I don't know exactly how valuable those things will be to do. So those are question mark for me. World quests as well. My understanding is you can get some good stuff out of the world quest ecosystem early on as well, but I don't know how much of a thing that'll be. Reputation as well, which is renown now in this expansion. All the
Yes.
reps, you just do renown tracks for them instead, which I think is a great use for renown. That seems much better to me than old rep, and also much better than like the Covenant renown working the way it is. There's not like anything super vital under those renown tracks, although there is some profession optional reagents you can get from that, but nothing that is like vital. It's just like good economic value, I think, that you get from that. Or it's stuff you could also get from doing like heroic and mythic dungeons, I believe.
So
there was an interview about this that I saw as well that I need to go find.
In addition, at the primal storm, somebody asked if they're not just a launch event thing. It's a different type of primal storm, is the answer. They're slightly different than the launch event, the pre-patch primal storms. It's kind of, I guess I'd equate them more similar to like raid bosses, I guess, or world bosses than anything else.
It's kind of like the assaults that would happen. The horde assaults in BFA. That it's just they're here in X.0 instead of X.1. But I don't think it's going to be a super pivotal source of gear. Maybe you can get a couple pieces from it. So,
Charles, do you know much about professions?
Well, I know enough that I like manually leveled up enchanting one time on beta, and it was so complex. I like lost my mind. It's crazy now. The professions are nuts. I think the majority of players are going to just like stare at professions for the first 2 weeks and just like wrap their head around them.
Yeah,
and otherwise clear mythic zeros.
You're going to have kind of a choice between like spending your time on professions and spending your time on alts. I think is going to be the decision that a lot of people are going to be choosing between. Although perhaps you can choose both. On professions, there was this interview with Soul So Breezy that was about professions that I just remembered now that had some really good info actually about how this was going to work. Every piece of major crafted gear will need a spark of ingenuity, which players will earn over time throughout the expansion. You get one automatically, one on Mythic Week, and then one every 2 weeks after until you've earned 5, at which point you can get effectively infinite, but they have a low drop rate. So we're looking at being capped basically at 2 crafted pieces of high item level. But then you also need a primal infusion and either a primal focus or a concentrated primal focus. The primal focus for heroic and the concentrated primal focus for mythic eye level crafting, which you can get a primal infusion from either combining primal chaos, which is something that drops all over the place, or you can also get them at the end of each of the 4 renown tracks. The first time you kill Razageth as well on any difficulty, you'll get one of those as well. But then you get the primal focus from heroic bosses and from plus 11 keys, and you get concentrated primal focus from probably plus 16 keys and from mythic raid bosses.
16s.
So
and just a couple of quick things. You actually need 2 sparks for 2-handers.
Yeah, 2-handers you do require 2 sparks for. So if you're crafting one of those, if you're a Fury Warrior and as well, you kind of get used to it. That's the usual Fury Warrior getting owned, but also it's still like it's not the end of the world or anything.
And I think they're like 405 item level or something. Is that right?
I don't know what level you can make with the concentrated primal focus. I thought it was maybe even 415, but. It's good stuff that can be created from these as well. And you don't need the profession yourself because you can use the crafting order system or get a crafter to make things for you. But I do think I've heard you need to be careful with using the crafting order system because you might want to ensure that the person has like high enough skill to get like the high star crafts of these things. So maybe a case of like actually finding a crafter that has the requisite skill or having one in your guild. You can see like Liquid is looking for liquid crafters, right? So like there's value here to players to having like the high level crafters available, but it does seem like that is going to be a pretty serious time investment to be good at.
Oh yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
you can work order it, right? Like, so you're like
Yes.
your individual character is going to
Well,
have the sparks, right? And you can have somebody else use their reagents and stuff like that.
Well, all the BOP stuff you're going to have to provide.
Yes.
And all the like basic materials you also have to provide, but you can use somebody else's crafting skill basically. But again, the crafting order system, you might not have. My understanding of this, and I'm not 100% on this. My understanding of this is that for some of the crafts, you actually want somebody with a high enough crafting skill and with enough like talent points to guarantee getting like a 4-star craft or a 5-star craft, because that's plus item levels on it. And so that may be a case of like actually finding a crafter through trade chat rather than using the crafting order system for those sorts of things. But I'm not 100% sure.
So you need to supply everything now if you're work ordering something. It's not just partials.
There's some that you don't have to. There's some that can be supplied by either, but they changed it recently to make it so that like the basic reagents are all supplied by the person making the order. Yeah.
Great to know. Okay, I'm glad that I have 8 million gold is what I will say right now.
I mean,
I found the message from my buddy Luigi. He told me today that on Mythic Tuesday release, you can get the 2 pieces that you mentioned or a 2-hander after you complete 10 plus 16s or higher to get that concentrated
primal focus
currency
thing. Yeah.
Oh, we need 10 plus 16s.
So you gotta do 10 plus 16s or above.
So
Yeah,
Dennis, when do you think we'll have the time to do 10 plus 16s?
Well, you can also get it from mythic raid bosses that you're killing. That you're dropping the concentrated primal foci. So,
And are you killing any mythic raid bosses week 1? Because I don't know if I am.
we'll see. We'll see. They drop good items.
All right.
First couple bosses probably
these are
pretty
like
easy.
these are 408 pieces. What's like the highest heroic eye level?
I think that's also 408 from
higher.
Razageth.
408.
Well,
the
the
lowest
bow
mythic is 415.
Yeah, the Razageth bow is maybe 415 as well on heroic. Maybe
So like I guess if you don't loot,
maybe higher.
you could like fill in your gear at the end of the week. This is probably the more realistic thing. You could fill in your gear after a few days or at the end of the week if you didn't loot something in raid. With, like
You probably,
1 or 2 slots.
funnily enough, you probably don't want to put it on any of your tier slots either.
Yeah, and you can't catalyze this later. Again, the catalyst doesn't open for the first 6 weeks anyways, but you can't catalyze the crafted gear. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see.
The weapon
sure
is
there's gonna be
probably
a-
the best bet.
Is it not the necklace? I think the necklace is broken or some shit, isn't it? Don't they
Oh,
have like some
you're
crazy
right.
stat
The
proc on
necklace
it?
has a good proc. Yeah,
There-
I
Yeah,
forgot
the
about
necklace
that.
has some bullshit stat proc on it.
Those
And
sorts
it
of
has,
things
like,
though
a
are the kinds of things
socket
that like get nerfed, week 0 of the expansion
Well-
or whatever sometimes. But yeah, if that makes it, yeah.
You would think that, but then they just buffed the hell out of enchants and gems recently, so I can't.
Yeah, but those aren't like those are different than like a crafted slot thing because
Uh-huh.
there's not an opportunity cost to wearing it. You're not choosing between wearing an enchant and not wearing an enchant. Yeah, I don't know. There's going to be some tension as well between like when do you actually bite the bullet and do your craft. Kind of like the legendary crafting thing. I suspect that the answer is going to be as soon as you have the resources. Unless you're like literally clearing easy content, you're going to want to make yourself something good to upgrade your character. But
Yeah.
we'll see. But yeah, other than that, it's just the first 2 weeks are going to be focused on M0s, alt leveling, alt M0s, professions. Those are going to be the things that, and I guess renown, reputation, world quests. And then we get to Mythic Week, and there's a lot to do all of a sudden. There will be a huge amount of value to any time you can spend doing keys. And of course, normal and heroic raid and mythic raid all coming out then as well.
There's a lot of profession info to learn. Like they're still messing with everything, all the numbers, but like there's not only new enchants on different pieces of gear that you're probably not used to. There's also just the process of getting those, and then the work orders are new, and like they're still balancing things. But there's like a 3-socket neck that you can build over time. There's 2 rings that have guaranteed slots. There's a lot to learn about. Hopefully, someone puts out like a good spreadsheet with everything.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's get down to Q&A, but first, get to thank our supporters over on the Patreon. They are Paul. Riley is a patron of mythicplus.subcreation. Would you care to join her? That's a great site. I definitely recommend that. That's a good one to patronize.
I'm a patron of MDT.
Another great one, yeah.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
a
love to see.
secret Twitch primer to creator of MDT for many months. I will do that.
Shit.
Yeah. Maybe I'll fly away from WoW and Dragonflight and finally be free, but I doubt it, for I always come back. Never Nude, Ja, Dratnos' Dino Pillow, Chromed, Trekkie, Chewy. Texan Resident enjoys living like a streamer, knowing every dungeon's fancy organized routes in TFP, aka Trell asked for it. Salty Senny, Necros, Sinmora, Tankdill, Nevuk, Eevee Survival Main, No Trick, I Forgot I Was Sub Tier, Dymat, Lufer, Rework Mistweaver, Welcome to the Age of Dragon D's, Evoker of US Proudmoore. Innovative name, congratulations. Nyx, Delete Gaming, Gallic, Brusif, Dratnoshots Abyss. Hey Tettles, where's Bert right now? Monk S.
It's on the ottoman.
He's out of frame. Yeah, he's out of frame on these vertical cameras that we've got. But
we can see him, but you guys can't.
Yeah.
Perfect.
M Sanity, Xena, Rogue is now good enough for Prague, still bad enough to be sat for SLG. Bless up. That one is going to be a really awkward name when we get to Dragonflight. We're going to have to DM person. Red Color, youtube.com/workbringer, Alphabet Soup, Druid Friends of Evolved Gaming, number one Simsky for Trelsky. Lurka isn't concerned about this Winds of Winter buff that you talk about because he had the wisdom to plan a trip back to Australia for the NA winter. Dude, yeah, it's crazy that just the other half of the world, you could just fly for 6 hours or whatever south, and then it's summer all of a sudden. But it's like winter up here. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
Milk. Sife, Pone, Windwalker Monks deal with Nerfs by rolling with the punches. Due to Sims with 4-piece, Skelly will be going back to Elemental from Enhance. PI for sale, I have my crafting to level. The Marsh Hare, Veil Strider Svar. Patreon tip of the week. In order to min-max Court of Stars buffs, reroll to a Gnome Holy Paladin with Cooking, Enchanting, and choose one from Alchemy, Leatherworking, Blacksmithing, or Herbalism, based on what else is in your party. This guarantees access to the best/most buffs available to one character.
That gets almost every single buff.
Can Gnome play Paladin? Is that allowed?
Is that one of the new ones? I don't know.
Maybe. I guess I haven't seen any Gnome Paladins, but that's probably because I'm not angling my vision low enough. Big Head Small Brain, Narnar TV is back and ready to press Starfall. Agitar, Juniper, V Phoenix is now V Voker, and he's ready to die to easily dodged mechanics all of Dragonflight. Me too. Oh yeah, me too. All right.
I've been playing Feral, and I also know this experience.
Welcome to Melee, my friends.
Holy shit.
We got a couple of Q&A questions to get to. Not too many today because we've gone a little long on our main topic, but our first one comes from QNU in Discord, who says, and this is, I guess, at me because I made this video. So with your recent Dragonflight Race to World First comps, what specs and classes are likely to be good video, you stress a point that I've seen repeated by both you and other content creators. The point is that this only matters at the absolute top level. And I get why you and everyone else feels the need to make this point to try and reduce how locked in the community at all levels get on the meta. However, isn't the truth that a 3% damage gain has the same marginal utility at any level of play? Like if I'm struggling to complete +2s, I will have 3% more of my probably mediocre damage to do. It is true at the top, there's less room to compensate with skill as there are ceiling effects, but the reason why everyone is searching for the meta is because it works. If you want KSM, that will be easier to achieve with a strong comp than with a weak one. Everyone's looking for the path of least resistance. Inviting someone that gives me 3% damage is often easier than getting good. Certainly some truth to this. I do think, though, that it is important to say that, like if you're looking to get a world first, and deciding what comp you're going to play, deciding which person you're going to play with, right? Like those sorts of decisions, like you need somebody who has skill and the right class for something, right? Like the right class for the moment. That you need all of that. When you are looking at a +2 key, the variation between two players that are applying to your group in LFG based on their skill is going to be massive. Now, obviously, you don't know which of them is better, so like given that you don't know that, yeah, you pick the one that's like higher skill or higher the better class, right? Like that is the reason that people make that pick. But it's not true that like if you run into a shaman in LFG and shaman's bad this season, which I'm not any particular season here, although that's often true. But it's like if you group up with an enhancement shaman and a +2, like they could absolutely carry your group and be great, right? But it's like there's no case where that's going to be true in a +28 key. There's no case where they're going to be better than the Destro lock applying to your group in that key level, which I think is the reason that's and by the way, that's an important thing. Is like whenever that is not true, that means they've done a really good job of balancing. But usually it is true that it's like that. For raids, similarly, it's like there's a lot of raid groups where the difference between the best and the worst players in the raid are the best player is doing like 2.5 times the damage of the worst player on the DPS meters, right? But that's not true at the high level, and therefore at the high level, it's like we literally can't complete this content without a Havoc Demon Hunter. But yeah, I'm not trying to say that like having a Demon Hunter doesn't make every raid better. I'm just saying like it goes from being a required thing to being a not required but upgrade thing in a context where there are a lot of upgrades that you could also make in terms of just player skill as well.
I will say though that if you're looking at, say you have a balanced raid comp and you're looking at Echo or Liquid and they're running 4-1 class for a raid boss, and you think, oh man, we only have 2 of this class. Very infrequently is it in your best interest to have multiple people in your raid group re-roll mid-tier. Very, very infrequently would I recommend players re-rolling for raid mid-tier because, first off, the gear that you had previously on their characters is like dead. On top of that, you don't know how well they're going to perform on that class if they've never played it before, if you've never seen them play it before. And I've, in my experience, there are a couple of people on a roster who generally can reroll mid-tier and have a lot of success. Often than not, they're tanks and healers. But asking DPS generally to do that, like, it's more often than not you're okay with being just kind of a one trick on DPS.
Yeah.
And if you have a balanced comp, you can probably make it work for most stuff, assuming that you're not running something really bad.
Like my guild will do those swaps, but it will do it pretty rarely, and it has to be like they're swapping from something bad to something good, and they're a good multi-classer, and it's like something that's really good.
Unless you're a tank or a healer, which in that case you should more likely than not have 2 healers, and if you're a tank, you should have
6 tanks.
Most of the tanks.
Yeah. 2 or 3.
A DK plus a couple of other tanks.
Sorry, Charlie, I cut you off there. What were you saying there?
Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, this problem of like playing the meta class only gets exaggerated the farther you go into the content. Like the harder the content, the more important the meta becomes. But unfortunately, you're right. It does trickle down a little bit. But you highly value the skill of the player over the class until you get to that very, very upper echelon of content, I'd say.
I mean,
it does depend a little bit on the context, because like I will say like Destro Lock Season 4 is probably among the most egregious examples it's ever been of like if I'm pugging a 15 and there's like any other class versus like a Destro Lock that has Rain of Fire keybound somewhere on their keyboard, like I know which of those players is going to do more damage, even if one of them is like a really good player.
Yeah. I mean, if tuning is that bad, it does not matter how skilled you are. That's true. But in general, skill does matter quite a bit until a certain point.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, part of that is also just like, you know, I think that when you're making videos like this, or when you're making like tier list videos, that kind of content, I think it's valuable and interesting to discuss. But then there's all those people that will be like, oh, these content creators are ruining the game by getting this meta to be enforced. So for that reason, I think it's always good to add the disclaimers into those videos so that no matter what, people are going to blame you for it, but
now
you don't want them to have any chance of being right.
If you're sitting there thinking, oh, should I reroll to this Fodden thing? Will I get invited more? The answer is always also yes. Yes, you will get more invites.
Yeah, that's much easier to plug, 100%.
But don't sacrifice your like what I would say is don't sacrifice your happiness over it.
Yeah, and ideally the balance, like the closer the balance is, the less true that's going to be as well. There are seasons where it's more and less true. But I would argue that discussing balance a lot and critically is something that makes it more likely rather than less likely that the balance gets good.
This is also more of an issue for DPS than tanks and healers, because I feel like tanks and healers are in such high demand in a lot of situations where you don't really kind of play with whatever.
I mean, if you were trying to get invited on a non-blood DK for even like weekly 15s this last season, my understanding was it was pretty tough. Again, I wasn't doing it much myself, but
I agree, but that's also another just extreme example where that season had both 2 DPS classes and a tank that were just unreasonably tuned way off. Like Blood DK was so much better than any tank.
Whatever the fuck Holy Priest was.
Yeah.
And Holy Priest, they're every role.
All right, our last question comes from Jambo the Nerd in Twitch chat, who says, how did Tettles, Dratnos, and Lord Ellesmere get a picture with the Larry O'Brien trophy with the Golden State Warriors? Yeah, we were down in LA, me, Tettles, Ellesmere, Peekaboo, Absturge. JPC was going to show up, but he didn't.
He dodged.
He dodged us. A bunch of the Golden Guardians people, and they brought because they're opening their esports facility down there. Mostly for their LCS team, I think, but also potentially something that we'll get to use for stuff at some point. And yeah,
you pull this picture.
All right, Let me pull
They
it
had
up.
Yeah,
they had
shoot
like
picture.
a picture taking booth
Yeah.
thing where we could take a picture with the trophy.
Isn't that cool?
They said absolutely no touching.
They did, yeah. But then when they weren't looking, I touched it. It was really cool.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it was yummy. But yeah,
Like TV.
it was cool. Yeah. Anyways, I believe that's it for us on the show this week. We again no show next week. We will be back on December the 1st for our first impressions of Dragonflight. So this is our last show of Shadowlands. Farewell Shadowlands. You know, you had your ups and downs, and we'll miss you. Some parts of you, maybe. I will miss Sludgefist, Halandris, Ragalon, Sire Denathrius, the encrypted affix.
Yeah.
The jailer,
Oh, this is
honestly,
what we're
although that's
doing,
kind of
huh?
unpopular.
I think if they cut that whole entire
Painsmith,
9.
Rasnal.
I think if they cut out that whole entire 9.1 incident from my memory, I wouldn't be too upset.
Yeah, I will not miss Corthia. I will not miss some of the other things. We've talked about those sorts of things before. Anything you guys will miss from Shadowlands?
Yeah, I'll miss just anything after 0.1.5 was a good time.
Yeah,
That's
I agree with
it.
that.
I'll just end it there.
Okay.
I'll miss the TGPs. The initial. I mean, we had the first TGP in Shadowlands. That was a banger. You know, I thought TGPs and WoW esports stuff. I mean, at least from the PvE side, has been pretty good. We had some of the sickest race roll firsts too. So, not gonna complain about that.
That's true.
I
Great
will
tournament.
miss Race Day in the Ramparts. That's a great world quest.
I
I'll
don't know what
miss,
he's talking about. Is that RP shit, Trell? Do you know?
That's no, it's one of the world quests in
I don't know that
Revendreth.
word.
It's a good one. It's really fun. I'll miss
You said
the flight
you said
school
world
world
quest.
quests as well.
Remember last
Those
time you did a
ones were
world
pretty
quest
cool.
titles?
No, absolutely fucking not.
Yeah.
It was like over a year ago for me.
Not gonna miss most of the other world quests. Anyways, that's gonna be it for us this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Later, gamers.
Later.